I extend my most heartfelt greetings and congratulations to the Gabriela USA General Assembly. Exactly 27 days, 10 months, and 37 years ago, on behalf of Joma, who was in prison under the Marcos fascist dictatorship, I delivered his keynote address to the founding assembly of your mother organization in the 10-day celebration of the International Women's Day starting March 8 to March 18, 1983. I brought my 1-year, 3-month, and 2-day-old son with me to the event, to the delight of some of the young women in the audience who competed in volunteering to take care of him while I took to the stage. The Philippines was still in the last few years of the Marcos fascist dictatorship, as Marcos's health deteriorated at the time when the General Assembly, binding women for reforms, independence, equality, leadership, and action, or in short, Gabriela, was founded. The Assembly brought together into a broad democratic alliance the women of all patriotic and progressive classes, sectors, organizations, and circles. As today, it was a time of urgent necessity for women from the working class, the peasantry, the middle strata, the upper classes, and the various professions to unite and fight for democracy against the fascist dictatorship. We were then confronting a tyrannical regime hell-bent on perpetuating the semi-colonial and semi-feudal system with the most barbaric means, while the political and economic crisis of the ruling system was daily worsening, imposing intolerable suffering and misery on the broad masses of the people, and reducing the overwhelming majority of women, especially those of the working class and peasantry, to abject poverty, stagnancy, and deprivation. A tyrannical regime that took pride in selling women as cheap labor and hospitality girls in the country and abroad. As today, the women's liberation movement is definitely a vital part of the overall democratic movement. Women's rights are an inseparable part of the national and democratic rights for which the entire Filipino people are fighting. Without the militant participation of women, half of the full force of the people, in the common struggle, victory cannot be won. Since the resurgence of the anti-imperialist and anti-feudal movement in the Philippines in the 1960s, the patriotic and progressive forces have always taken a special interest in the development of the women's movement and in the increased participation of women in the struggle for national liberation and democracy. We were enlightened by the writings and deeds of revolutionary women leaders like Clara Zetkin, Alexandra Kollontai, and Rosa Luxemburg, and inspired by the heroic examples of Gabriela Silang, Melchora Aquino, Gregoria de Jesus, and other revolutionary Filipino women leaders. We were guided by Mao's teachings that women hold up half of the sky. The activists of the Student Cultural Association of the University of the Philippines, the Women's Bureau of Kabataang Makabayan, and Makibaka was set up in 1971 as a development in women's work. From then on, it helped to take on the task of conscious and dedicated systematic organizing and mobilizing of the women in the labor unions, peasant associations, and professional circles. Thus, we carried forward the progressive role of women from the very beginning of the National Democratic Mass Movement in the 1960s. Our problem then, during the past few years of Marcos, was upholding, asserting, and realizing the sovereign will of the people, their national independence from foreign interests and entities, and their civil and political rights as individuals, organizations, and classes. We were acutely aware of the urgent necessity of uniting and fighting for democracy against an autocracy, a fascist dictatorship that euphemistically called itself constitutional authoritarianism, an open rule of terror by a narrow and bureaucrat military clique, the desperate outgrowth and concentrated expression or manifestation of foreign and feudal domination. This required us to be comprehensively anti-fascist, anti-imperialist, and anti-feudal. While the immediate and common target was the Marcos fascist dictatorship, it was increasingly clear to the people that this was the most monstrous instrument of the oppressive and exploitative foreign monopoly, big comprador, and feudal interests. The fascist dictatorship and its foreign masters colluded in gimmicks and exercises of deception while unleashing an ever-rising wave of violence. Responding to the crisis, women, daughters of Gabriela Silang, became aware of the fundamental problems of society and found opportunity to assume militant and active roles and realize in a big way their long-suppressed potential. In fighting for the establishment of democracy at a new and higher level, women have the opportunity not only to prove that they are as capable as the men in the general effort to liberate the country from fascist, foreign, and feudal oppression and exploitation, but also to achieve the basic conditions for their liberation from male domination. Male chauvinism is the outgrowth of unjust social formations through the ages and finds concentrated expression today in the feudal patriarchal values and the decadent bourgeois values of a semi-colonial and semi-feudal society. In the course of participating in the new democratic revolution, the women enlightened themselves, cast away the prejudices against them, and promote their rights. As they become politically conscious and organized along the national democratic line, they can act more effectively to smash the structures of the present society, gain democratic reforms in their favor, and together with the men, bring about an entirely new political and economic system that provides ever-rising levels of economic, political, social, and cultural opportunities. In a truly democratic society, women's organizations ensure that women's interests and rights are safeguarded and promoted, that the women are significantly represented and assume positions of leadership in public and state organs. National industrialization and land reform liberate women, especially the overwhelming majority who belong to the working class and peasantry. They are freed from the misery of poverty, stagnation, and consignment to humdrum chores of the household. All fields of social activity are open to them. Women can freely choose their course of study, profession, or occupation according to their ability and the needs of society. They enjoy the right of equal pay for equal work and yet enjoy special rights corollary to their special functions of childbearing. They can stand up against any discrimination and sexual harassment, laws and customs prejudicial to women in marital, family, professional, occupational, and other social relations are cast off in favor of democratic laws. A new milieu shall arise where man and woman willingly discuss and decide matters of mutual concern, from division of household chores to more weighty concerns. Women cease to be the economic dependents or customary captives of men. Women are entitled to free choice of spouse, freedom from dowry requirements and costly ceremonies, the primary right to take care of her children, and the right to be consulted on all matters involving the family, the right to equality and security in matters of property and income, and the right to seek every appropriate means to settle family and marital problems. Of course, women are entitled to certain special rights related to their biological function. Call it peculiarities or particularity and special service to humanity. That is the reproduction of humankind. They are entitled to maternity leave with pay, accommodations for breastfeeding and child care at their workplaces, exemption from strenuous physical work during menstruation and pregnancy, and so on. Apart from this special natural consideration, women are equal to men in almost everything. The oldest basis for some temporary or constant division of work has been the sex factor. But this has been abused and unjustly elaborated on through millennia of class exploitation. The completion of the new democratic revolution necessarily means the inception of socialist revolution, and with it, the eradication of the worst forms of degradation and equality of women. Prostitution and its root causes will be removed. In the main, I have been discussing women's rights in general. In your general program of action, you also discuss this very well. I urge you to further do your class analysis in the United States among women of all nationalities, in general and among the Filipinos and Phil-Ams in particular. My understanding from the statistics you provided is that the majority of women in the U.S. belong to the working class and the precarious strata of the middle class. The analysis should cover the different categories of women and their conditions. In the Philippines, at least 90% of Filipino women belong to the downtrodden masses of workers and peasants. They are the most exploited women in our country. Under Duterte, they face a regime surpassing Marcos's in viciousness, fascism, tyranny, treason, plunder, and deceptiveness. They suffer from unemployment and the rising costs of living. What they need is a fundamental change in the social condition. Some reforms can help them. Push for these reforms not just to improve their present condition, but also to raise their capabilities in fighting for radical transformation of the society as well as of the specific conditions of women. Nothing less than the victory of the new democratic revolution will lift them up in a lasting manner. Because of their needs and their number, the women from the toiling classes can become the most powerful female force for the democratic revolution. Through your assembly, alliance, and varied organizations, you must address yourself to the women of the toiling masses in both urban and rural areas. You must pay critical attention to the concrete conditions and problems of factory-employed women, the housewives, and agricultural workers, and what have you. You must conduct educational campaigns, organize chapters, establish self-help projects, and mobilize them for democratic actions. You must be quick to act in defense of women who belong to the toiling masses and who side with them when they are subjected to the most brutal abuses of the growing fascist forces and actions, such as police brutality, arbitrary arrest, detention, torture, rape, murder, forced displacement, and so on. You can support the grossly exploited women workers in the garment, electronic, and other enterprises. You have been doing very well as Gabriela Overseas Chapter in acting as a campaign center for the U.S. Filipino women's mass movement. As such, you have performed well in exposing the intensifying crisis of imperialism and neoliberal attacks on working class people. As Filipino women, you have been at the front lines of the battles against the pandemic as nurses and caregivers. We have seen how migrant women, including J1 workers, were neglected and exploited by the U.S. and Philippine governments and corporations. You must continue to expand your ranks amongst the most exploited Filipino women. As Duterte desperately clings to power and increased fascist attack against the toiling masses and human rights defenders through targeted and systematic killings, the passage of the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020, and aggressive harassment and terror tagging of mass leaders, so do other like-minded tyrannical rulers all over the world in suppressing the rising tide of protest and resistance where they occur. They leave the people no choice but to build and strengthen their ranks for the purpose of struggle. As you observe in your GPOA, the neoliberal impact on women workers and peasant women amid an untenable socio-economic crisis, the backdrop of rising fascism are no match for the waves of growing people's resistance. In a big way, you must redouble your efforts in the international campaign to oust Duterte through all means available to you in the United States. Focus on the crimes of impunity and gross violation of accepted norms of the rule of law, and even more, the crimes of humanity perpetrated on communities, especially in the countryside, and impoverished communities in the urban areas. Demand independent investigations from appropriate international agencies. Campaign for non-governmental initiatives such as the tribunals held in 2018 and earlier against crimes of various Philippine regimes. Call for investigation that deliver reports to the United Nations and its agencies and other pertinent bodies such as the International Criminal Court in The Hague. To help your mother organization in our homeland, you can raise resources for urban and rural women to help them establish production cooperatives among the urban and rural women who are unemployed and underemployed. You can help them establish puriculture centers, daycare, and elementary medical care centers. You must continue to build and broaden solidarity support for them among non-Filipino women through cooperation and coordination with the International Women's Alliance as the broadest anti-imperialist united front of women globally. I urge you to take up the issue of prostitution, especially at this time of extreme unemployment and ever-rising impoverishment. Even while prostitution cannot be eliminated under the present social system, you can study and expose the problems, combat and reduce its growth, and carry out methods to retrieve and rehabilitate the victims. There are so many specific campaigns and projects that you can undertake in order to give immediate help to your fellow women if you are well organized and determined to take on concrete problems, and in doing so, develop the strength and capability for solving basic problems. Women of the middle strata, especially if they are college educated, often have the illusion that they are already enjoying democratic rights and equality with men to a satisfactory extent. But whether they are kept as housewives or they go to offices, they still need to struggle in order not only to obtain but also to safeguard what is due them. The point is for them to study their conditions. At the rate that the crisis is worsening, the women of the social strata, including the professionals, are increasingly assailed by soaring costs of living, unemployment, or reduction in real income, depreciation of the currency, higher taxes, and so on. In very concrete terms, more and more women of the middle strata are falling into the lot of the poor or the precariat, as are their menfolk. The women in the teaching and nursing professions have been exploited for so long and have become the most militant in fighting for economic demands in order to maintain a decent standard of living. You can assist them in their struggle, and they in turn can assist other sectors of the women's movement in advancing the cause of national democracy. Women in the medical, legal, and other professions can extend free services to women who are in need of this, especially undocumented workers. The predominance of professionals in a broad women's organization is not necessarily undemocratic, so long as they take up the cause of the women of the lower classes and thereby advance the cause of national and social liberation. Enlightened women from the upper classes can also join the progressive women's movement. Their social conscience, talents, and extra means are needed. If they analyze their own conditions, these privileged women would realize that they can make their lives meaningful by contributing what they can to the women's movement. There have been outstanding examples of upper-class women who have become enlightened, forsaken luxuries and frivolities, and gone beyond token charities to work actively for the cause of democracy, social justice, and peace, together with the women of the toiling masses and middle strata. But of course, the toiling women are the main force cooperating with the men in bringing about national and social liberation. The working class, as the most advanced, productive, and political force, is the basis for the most advanced ideology in modern society. Women who take the stand, viewpoint, and method of the working class are the most capable of leading the women's movement in the new democratic revolution as well as in the socialist construction and revolution. I am confident that through your General Assembly, you will examine and analyze your successes and failures, as well as your achievements and shortcomings, and further strengthen your resolve to fulfill the tasks that you have set for yourselves in your general program of action for the coming period. If I may touch slightly on the subject of women's oppression, as you requested, it would be useful for you to study Engels' Origin of the Family, Private Property, and State. Here Engels observed that patriarchalism and the oppression of women emerged from the late barbaric stage of primitive communal society and grew increasingly in the development of all exploitative class societies. The man took command of the home also. The woman was degraded and reduced to servitude. She became the slave of his lust and a mere instrument for the production of children. As a fitting end to my discussion, I quote Engels again. The emancipation of woman will only be possible when woman can take part in production on a large social scale, and domestic work no longer claims anything but an insignificant amount of her time. Thank you.